If you truly didn't care, why are you still thinking about them? There are forces inside you that shape your life without your awareness. Thoughts you don't control, reactions that feel automatic, emotions you believe have disappeared, only to resurface when you least expect them. You tell yourself you're fine, that you've moved on. That emotional detachment is a sign of strength. But if that were true, why do you still feel the weight of something unresolved? Why does the past still reach for you in moments of silence? Why does the person you no longer speak to still occupy space in your mind? Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers in psychology, dedicated his life to understanding the unseen forces that drive human behavior. A student of Sigmund Freud, he expanded on the idea that much of what we do, our fears, desires, and patterns, are not fully within our control. Jung believed that the human psyche is not just what we consciously experience, but also what we repress. And what remains in the unconscious does not simply disappear, it controls us from the shadows. He called this the shadow self, the hidden part of us that holds the emotions, wounds, and truths we refuse to face. You may believe your emotional detachment is a conscious choice, but Jung would argue that it's a symptom of something buried deep within you. Detachment is not the absence of emotion. It is the suppression of it. What you think you've let go of has not vanished. It has only been pushed out of sight. But the mind does not erase pain simply because you choose to ignore it. Instead, it transforms it into something else, into avoidance, into distrust, into a habit of walking away before someone can get too close. At first, detachment feels like control. You mistake numbness for resilience. You convince yourself that you are above emotion, that you no longer feel what once hurt you. But in reality, you have not freed yourself. You have only distanced yourself from your own truth. The past is not gone. It lingers in your choices. It lives in the way you hesitate before opening up, in the way you keep people at arm's length, in the way you convince yourself you don't need anyone when deep down you crave connection more than anything. And then, without warning, the past resurfaces. A memory, a song, a familiar scent. A moment where, for just an instant, your carefully built walls crack. If you are truly detached, why does a single reminder have the power to unravel you? Because detachment is not healing, it is postponement. The emotions you suppress do not fade, they manifest in different ways. You push people away not because you don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. You avoid closeness, not because you don't want it, but because intimacy requires vulnerability. Jung warned that what remains unconscious will control you, and you will call it fate. You believe you have moved on, but what if you have only buried what still owns you? What if your emotional detachment is not strength, but fear in disguise? The shadow never forgets. The longer you run from it, the more power it gains. The real question is, how much longer will you let it decide for you? There's a strange kind of silence that follows emotional detachment. Not the peaceful kind, but the empty kind, the type that makes even the best moments feel muted. You don't hurt the way you used to, but you also don't feel the rush of happiness, the depth of connection, or the warmth of being fully present with someone. Life keeps moving, but you feel like you're watching it from a distance, untouched, uninvolved. This wasn't always the case. There was a time when emotions were vivid, when experiences had weight, when love and loss weren't just ideas but forces that shaped you. Now, it all feels theoretical. Conversations feel rehearsed, interactions predictable, and the people around you notice, though they rarely say it out loud. They call you independent, self-sufficient, someone who doesn't get attached easily. And maybe that's true. Or maybe you've just become too good at keeping the world at arm's length. Detachment convinces you that you're in control. It tells you that by shutting down, you're protecting yourself from disappointment, rejection, and pain. But it doesn't warn you about the trade-off. You don't just avoid suffering, you avoid everything. The depth of connection, the rawness of experience, even the feeling of being truly seen. The further you distance yourself, the more foreign intimacy becomes. You start mistaking solitude for peace, emotional numbness for wisdom, and the ability to walk away for strength. But is it strength, or is it just fear wearing a different mask? The avoidance of pain isn't the same as healing. It's a pause button on emotions that never truly go away. The things you refuse to feel don't vanish. They sink deeper. And one day, when you least expect it, they resurface in ways you never saw coming. The cost of detachment is never immediate. It's slow, quiet, almost unnoticeable. Until one day, you look around and realize you're not just disconnected from others. You're disconnected from yourself. Somewhere along the way, emotional detachment stopped feeling like a reaction and started feeling like a way of life. It wasn't a conscious decision, not really. It was a slow shift, a quiet adaptation to the disappointments, the betrayals, the moments where vulnerability felt like a mistake. Over time, you stopped expecting, stopped hoping, stopped feeling as much. You learned to pull away before anything could hurt you. And now, it's just who you are, unshaken, self-sufficient, impossible to break. But what if this version of you isn't as free as you think? What if what you call strength is actually just avoidance in disguise? The mind has a way of convincing you that survival is the same as healing, that as long as you don't feel pain, you must be whole. But Carl Jung would argue otherwise. Detachment isn't absence, it's suppression. And whatever is suppressed doesn't disappear. It waits. Jung believed that the unconscious mind is always at work, shaping our behaviors, our relationships, and even our beliefs about ourselves. The things you refuse to confront don't vanish. They become part of your shadow, the hidden aspect of your psyche where all your unprocessed emotions, fears, and wounds reside. You may think you've let go, but the truth is, nothing that deeply affects you ever truly leaves. It just finds new ways to surface. That's why certain patterns keep repeating in your life. The same emotional distance in every relationship, the same feeling of exhaustion when someone tries to get too close, the same instinct to push people away before they have the chance to leave. You tell yourself these are just preferences, logical choices. But what if they aren't choices at all? What if they are reflexes, ingrained so deeply in your unconscious that you don't even recognize them as defense mechanisms? The shadow self isn't just the dark parts of you. It's the parts you've rejected, the emotions you've denied, the vulnerabilities you've buried. It holds the version of you that once craved closeness, that once felt deeply, that once trusted freely. Over time, as detachment takes hold, that version of you fades into the unconscious, and in its place, you become someone who avoids rather than connects, who dismisses rather than engages, who convinces themselves that they are better off alone. But the unconscious doesn't stay hidden forever. No matter how much you push it down, it leaks out in quiet ways, through unexplained loneliness, through the inability to form lasting bonds, through a persistent feeling that something is missing, even if you can't quite name it. The longer you ignore it, the more it controls you, making choices on your behalf without you realizing it. Jung warned that until you confront your unconscious patterns, they will run your life, and you will simply call it fate. You will wonder why relationships never seem to work, why love feels exhausting, why nothing ever seems to reach you the way it once did. But the truth is, detachment was never the goal. Wholeness was. And the real question is, after all this time, Will you let yourself find it again? It feels like control, the ability to walk away without hesitation, to remain unaffected, to avoid the messiness of emotions. You've learned to cut ties without looking back, to guard yourself against disappointment, to never expect too much from anyone. But what if this control is nothing more than an illusion? What if the detachment you've mastered is not keeping you safe, but keeping you trapped? Emotional detachment isn't just a habit, it's a system, a pattern reinforced by the mind to prevent pain, and like any system built on fear, it comes with traps. The first is the false sense of power. You convince yourself that needing nothing makes you invincible, that emotional distance is a form of self-preservation. You tell yourself that you don't rely on anyone, that you're self-sufficient, that you've transcended the need for deep emotional bonds. But what happens when you no longer know how to need anyone at all? When you don't allow yourself to be cared for, to be supported, to be vulnerable? There's a fine line between strength and avoidance, and once crossed, it's easy to mistake loneliness for freedom. Then there's the cycle of self-sabotage. You tell yourself that people always leave, that love always fades, that deep connections are unreliable. And so, to protect yourself, you push them away first. You hold back when you should lean in. You withhold affection when you should express it. You shut down before someone even has the chance to hurt you. In doing so, you create the very outcome you feared, proving to yourself again and again that closeness isn't worth it. But is it really that love fails you? Or have you spent years ensuring that it never gets close enough to succeed? The longer you remain detached, the harder it becomes to access your emotions at all. This is the erosion of emotional depth. You don't just avoid pain, you avoid feeling. The high moments don't feel as high. The warmth of connection doesn't feel as fulfilling. There's a hollowness beneath the surface, one that's difficult to describe, but impossible to ignore. You tell yourself that life is steady now, that things are simpler this way. But deep down, something is missing. The things that once excited you no longer reach you in the same way, and over time, you forget what it was like to feel truly alive. But the greatest trap of all is the inability to recognize what's missing. When you've spent so long convincing yourself that you don't need love, don't need closeness, don't need connection, you stop seeing their absence as a loss. You accept the emptiness as normal. You adapt. You function. You tell yourself this is peace. And by the time you realize that something is missing, you've already forgotten how to let it back in. Jung warned that repression doesn't free us. It only buries the truth deeper. You can tell yourself you don't care. You can convince yourself you don't need anyone. But if that were true, why does something still feel incomplete? Why does solitude sometimes feel more like isolation than peace? Emotional detachment was supposed to protect you. It was supposed to eliminate the risk of heartbreak, the unpredictability of relationships, the exhaustion of emotional highs and lows. And in many ways it did. But it also took something else with it. The ability to feel deeply connected, truly seen and fully understood. It's easy to convince yourself that this is just the way you are, that you prefer being on your own, that other people only bring complications. But then there are moments, fleeting but undeniable, where the silence feels heavier than it should, where the absence of connection doesn't feel like strength, but like something slipping further and further away from you. Jung believed that what we reject within ourselves creates a divide between the conscious and the unconscious mind. The more you detach, the more you separate yourself from your own emotional needs. And yet, the need for connection does not disappear. It only transforms. Instead of seeking closeness, you distract yourself. You keep busy, you overanalyze, you build a life that is structured, efficient, and controlled. Anything to avoid sitting alone with the truth, that beneath the surface, loneliness has been quietly growing in the spaces where love and vulnerability used to live. The problem is that emotional detachment rewires the way you experience connection. The warmth of a deep conversation, the comfort of emotional safety, the feeling of being truly understood. These things become unfamiliar, almost foreign. And when something becomes unfamiliar, it starts to feel uncomfortable. So you avoid it. You convince yourself you don't need it. You find flaws in people before they get too close. You keep relationships shallow, safe, at a distance that feels manageable. And yet, despite all of this, something inside you still longs for something more. The truth is, loneliness doesn't just stem from being alone. It comes from feeling disconnected, even when surrounded by others. You can have 100 acquaintances and still feel unknown. You can be admired, respected, even loved. But if you don't allow yourself to be fully seen, none of it will ever feel real. That is the cost of detachment. It keeps you from the pain of loss, but also from the beauty of closeness. It protects you from rejection, but at the cost of deep connection. It ensures you never get hurt. But in doing so, it also ensures you never truly feel at home with another person. So, is it really that you don't need anyone? Or have you just convinced yourself that needing someone is a risk you're no longer willing to take? Emotional detachment keeps you safe, but it also keeps you separate. The walls built to prevent pain have done their job, but now they stand between you and everything that once made life meaningful. Loneliness, once ignored, is no longer subtle. Something in you knows that staying detached is no longer enough, that survival isn't the same as truly living. But if detachment has been your armor for so long, how do you begin to let it go? Breaking free from emotional detachment doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel all at once. It doesn't mean tearing down every defense overnight. The mind doesn't work that way. What's been built over years cannot be undone in a moment. Healing begins with recognition, the willingness to see what's been hidden, to confront what's been avoided. Carl Jung believed that integrating the shadow was the key to wholeness. That which remains in the dark will always control you. But what is acknowledged, explored, and understood can finally lose its grip. Reconnecting with emotions after detachment is disorienting. It feels unnatural at first, as if something inside resists it. Old habits pull you back toward distance, reminding you how much easier it is to stay guarded. But the discomfort of vulnerability isn't a sign to retreat. It's a sign that something inside you is waking up again. Small moments of presence, allowing yourself to sit with emotion rather than numb it, choosing to express rather than suppress, begin to rebuild what was lost. For so long, detachment has dictated your interactions, making sure nothing gets too deep, too risky. But now, noticing those patterns is the first step toward undoing them. The instinct to withdraw when someone gets too close, the need to shut down when emotions feel overwhelming, these are remnants of a past self that believed distance was the only way to stay safe. Awareness disrupts the cycle. The moment you recognize the urge to detach, you reclaim the ability to choose differently. Healing detachment is not about rejecting independence. It's about rediscovering connection without fear. It's about realizing that needing people doesn't make you weak, that vulnerability isn't a threat, and that feeling doesn't mean losing control. It's learning to exist in the space between extremes, not consumed by emotion, but not disconnected from it either. The goal was never to drown in feeling, but to learn how to let it move through you without resistance. There's a version of you that existed before detachment took hold, a version that felt without hesitation, that trusted, that loved without measuring risk. That part of you was never erased, only buried. And now, for the first time in a long time, you have the chance to find it again. The instinct to detach has been with you for so long that it feels like second nature. The thought of lowering your guard, of feeling deeply again, is unfamiliar, even unsettling. After all, detachment once kept you from breaking. But what if emotional strength isn't about shutting down? What if it's about learning to stand in the storm without running from it? There's a kind of strength in holding yourself together, in keeping your emotions at bay so they don't overwhelm you. But true emotional strength isn't built on avoidance. It's built on resilience. Not the kind that forces you to suffer in silence, but the kind that allows you to experience life fully without fear of being consumed by it. Strength is not measured by how well you can block out pain, but by how willing you are to face it without letting it define you. Somewhere along the way, detachment convinced you that needing nothing was the ultimate freedom, that the safest way to live was to remain untouched, unaffected, impossible to hurt. But freedom isn't found in isolation. It's found in the ability to connect without fear, to care without losing yourself, to trust without constantly preparing for loss. Emotional strength isn't about being untouchable. It's about knowing you can be touched and still remain whole. Letting go of detachment doesn't mean becoming vulnerable to anything and everything. It means knowing when to let yourself feel, when to let yourself care, and when to trust that not every emotion is a threat. It's about understanding that connection isn't weakness, and that guarding yourself from pain should never come at the cost of guarding yourself from life. Maybe you're not ready to tear down the walls completely. That's okay. Healing isn't about rushing to undo everything at once. It's about recognizing that there's more to life than just avoiding what hurts. Maybe today you simply acknowledge that strength doesn't mean shutting yourself off. Maybe tomorrow you let yourself feel something without labeling it as dangerous. One step at a time, you learn that true emotional strength isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling deeply and knowing you'll be okay no matter what comes next. And if this journey has resonated with you, if you've seen yourself in these words and felt something shift within you, consider showing your support with a super thanks. It's a small way to say, "This message mattered." Your engagement helps keep these conversations alive. So if you've found value here, let me know. Let's continue unraveling these patterns together. Because healing isn't something you do alone, it's something we all navigate, step by step, until the weight no longer feels so heavy.